The morning my daughter told me I was too present in their lives, I had just finished transferring $800 to cover their electric bill. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in Savannah, still in my robe, watching the confirmation number appear on my phone screen. $800. And somewhere across town, my daughter and her husband were sleeping in past 10, their blackout curtains keeping out a sun I had already watched rise. I did not say anything that morning. I set the phone down, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and watched a cardinal land on the feeder outside my window. That is what I do when something hurts more than I can hold. I find something small and beautiful, and I watch it until the pain becomes manageable. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Dorothy, and I am 67 years old. I live in a pale yellow house on a quiet street in Savannah, Georgia, and for most of my adult life, I believed that a mother's love was something you proved through action. Not words, action. My own mother had taught me that. She worked double shifts at a textile plant for 22 years so that my brother and I could have shoes that fit and a Christmas that meant something. She never said, "I love you," the way people say it easily now, tossed out at the end of phone calls like an afterthought. She said it by showing up, by sacrificing, by making sure that whatever she had, we had more. I carried that belief into my own motherhood like a torch. When my husband passed 11 years ago, a heart attack, sudden, a Tuesday morning in March, I was left with a paid-off house, a modest teacher's pension, some savings we had built carefully over 34 years of marriage, and one daughter. My daughter, Claire, who was 29 at the time, already married to a man named Derek, already living the kind of life that looked beautiful on the outside and cost more than it should have. The grief of losing my husband is something I will carry until I do not carry anything anymore. He was my steadiness. He was the one who balanced my generosity with common sense. When I would want to give, he would ask the right questions. How much? For how long? What is the plan? Not because he was unkind, because he loved me enough to protect me from my own open hands. Without him, my hands stayed open. In the first year after he died, I gave because grief made me want to hold on to the people I still had. Claire and Derek came over for dinner twice a week. They called often. I told myself this was closeness. I paid for things because I could, and because each payment felt like a thread connecting me to something living, something that needed me. I paid their car note when Derek's hours got cut at the firm he worked for. I covered 2 months of their mortgage when they said they were restructuring financially, a phrase that Derek used with great confidence, despite the fact that he had no idea what it meant in practice. I bought their groceries. I paid their streaming subscriptions, their gym memberships, their vet bills for the 2 dogs Claire had adopted without asking Derek, and certainly without asking herself whether they could afford them. It crept up slowly, the way these things always do. One payment here, one favor there. And then one day you look down, and there are 89 separate bank transfers over 3 years, and you realize the thread you thought was connection is actually something else entirely. 89. I know because I counted. I have the bank statements in a manila folder in the bottom drawer of my desk, each transfer highlighted in yellow, each one with a small handwritten note in the margin explaining what it was for. Car note, mortgage, electric, groceries, vet, vacation. Yes, vacation. I will come back to that, and on until the folder was thick and my hands shook a little when I held it. But I did not know the number was 89 yet. Not for a long time. What I knew, in those early years, was only that I felt needed. And when you are a woman of 65 living alone in a house that still smells faintly of your dead husband's woodworking oil, being needed feels dangerously close to being loved. Claire is my only child. I had wanted more, but that was not the path my life took. and I made my peace with it. I poured everything into her. She was bright and funny and a little reckless in the way that beautiful young women sometimes are, spending money before she had it, saying yes to things before she understood what yes would cost her. I always thought she would grow out of it. I thought marriage would settle her. I thought responsibility would come with time, the way wisdom is supposed to. Derek was the kind of man who wore his self-assurance like expensive cologne. He worked in commercial real estate, or said he did, though the details of what exactly he produced each day were always slightly unclear to me. He drove a car that was too nice for his income, wore shoes that cost more than my monthly utility bills, and spoke about money with the casual confidence of a man who had never actually managed any. He called me Miss Dorothy with a smile that landed just on the right side of charming, and for a long time I gave him more credit than he earned. He and Claire had bought a house 3 years into their marriage. A beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen with marble countertops, a backyard with a patio they furnished with outdoor furniture from a boutique store downtown. I helped with the down payment because they were $5,000 short, and I had it, and because I told myself it was an investment in their future and therefore in mine. I did not know then that I would continue investing in their future for years, while they invested in nothing that resembled one. The first time something snagged inside me, not broke, just snagged, like a thread catching on a nail, was the summer of Claire and Derek's 5th anniversary. I had transferred money that month for their electric bill, their car insurance, and a plumber they needed when a pipe burst in the upstairs bathroom. I was sitting at my kitchen table one evening going over my own accounts, something I did at the end of each month with a yellow legal pad and a sharpened pencil, the way my husband had taught me. I noticed that my savings had decreased by more than I had expected, not alarmingly, but enough to make me pause. I thought about calling Claire to talk through it, the way mothers and daughters are supposed to be able to talk about real things. But when I tried to imagine the conversation, I could not quite find the door into it. Instead, I sharpened another pencil and moved on. 2 weeks later, Claire sent me photos from a resort in the Florida Keys. She and Derek were celebrating their anniversary, she said. They looked tan and happy in the photos. Claire was wearing a sundress I had never seen before, something flowy and expensive looking. Derek had a drink in his hand in every single picture. The resort had a pool that overlooked the ocean. They had stayed for 4 nights. I remember looking at those photos for a long time. I remember not saying anything. The snagged thread held. The second time something snagged was at Thanksgiving of that same year. I had cooked everything, the turkey, the sides, the pies, and driven it all over to their house, because the marble kitchen was bigger and more comfortable for a gathering, even though the gathering was only 4 people, me, Claire, Derek, and Claire's friend Vanessa, who had nowhere else to go. I had arrived at noon with my arms full. By 3 o'clock, after the meal, Claire and Derek had retreated to the living room to watch football, and I found myself alone in the kitchen washing every dish, pot, and serving platter by hand, because their dishwasher had broken 2 weeks earlier, and they had not gotten around to fixing it. I washed for an hour. Neither of them came in to help or to check on me. When I was done, I dried my hands on a dish towel and stood in the kitchen of the beautiful house with the marble countertops, and I thought, very quietly, that I was a guest here who paid for the door she walked through. I drove home that night in the dark and sat in my car in my driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. The thread pulled tighter, but I still did not stop, because stopping felt like withdrawing love, and I did not yet understand that what I was giving was not being received as love. It was being received as a utility, something expected, something as assumed as running water. The comment that finally cracked something open in me came on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I had called Claire to see if she wanted to meet for lunch, something we used to do regularly, but had been doing less and less because her schedule, as she explained it, was very full. She did not answer. She texted back 20 minutes later. The text said, "Mom, Derek and I have talked about this. We think you have a tendency to insert yourself, and it's creating stress for us. We need a little more breathing room. Can we maybe keep visits to once a month?" I read it 3 times. Then I read it a 4th time. Slowly, making sure I understood each word correctly. I, Dorothy May Caldwell, who had raised this woman, sat with her through every heartbreak and fever and failure, who had been transferring money into her account on average twice a month for 3 years. I was inserting myself. I was creating stress. I needed to give them more breathing room. I set my phone on the kitchen table. I did not text back. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, which still feels too wide after 11 years, and I looked at my hands in my lap for a long time. A mother's hands. Hands that had braided her hair and bandaged her knees and written checks and made transfers and cooked Thanksgiving alone and driven home in the dark. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about my husband, the way he would have said something calm and clarifying if he were still here. Something like, "Dorothy, you have to decide whether you're buying love or giving it, because those are not the same transaction." He was right, the way he was always right about the things I did not want to hear. The next morning I opened my banking app. I did not do this to count. I did it because I needed to see clearly what I had been doing, what I had been building, transfer by transfer, for 3 years. It took me 2 hours. When I was done, I had a legal pad covered in neat columns: date, amount, purpose, and at the bottom, a total I stared at for a long moment. 89 transfers, $43,260 over 37 months. I sat with that number for a long time. I thought about what $43,000 meant to me. It meant 7 years of my husband's careful, consistent retirement contributions before he died. It meant the money my parents had worked themselves thin for. It meant my security, my independence, the buffer between me and fear. And I thought about what $43,000 meant to Claire and Derek. Based on how they lived the resort photos, the boutique patio furniture, the gym memberships, the dogs with their vet bills, it had meant very little. It had been absorbed and disappeared, like water into sand, leaving no visible trace of gratitude, no change in how they treated me, no moment where either of them had turned to me and said, sincerely, "Mom, we are so grateful for what you do." Not once. I thought about the text. Breathing room. They needed breathing room from a woman who had quietly funded nearly every comfortable breath they had taken for 3 years. I printed out the bank statements that afternoon. All of them. I highlighted each transfer in yellow and wrote notes in the margins in my small, careful handwriting. Then I put them in a manila folder and placed the folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not confront Claire. I did not call Derek. I did not fire off an angry response to the text about breathing room. I had watched enough pain in my life to know that rage is the emotion of people who still want to be heard. I no longer needed to be heard. I needed to be free. I made a list. Car insurance. Removed Claire and Derek from my policy. Derek's car note. I had been making this payment through an automatic transfer set up 2 years ago. I logged in and canceled it. Their portion of a streaming service on my account, removed. The monthly grocery contribution I wired on the 1st of every month, stopped. The electric bill autopay I had set up at their request when Derek said the automated system was confusing, canceled. And so on down the list one by one, until all 89 categories of outflow had been closed. It took me 45 minutes, less time than it had taken to wash their Thanksgiving dishes. I did it without anger. I want to be clear about that. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I felt, if anything, a strange and unfamiliar lightness, the way a room feels when you have finally moved out the furniture that was always in the wrong place. When I was done, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the good chair by the window, the one with the needlepoint cushion. I made myself the winter my husband died, and I watched the evening settle over the yard. I did not hear from Claire for 11 days. On the 12th day, she called. I let it ring through to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Then Derek called, which he had not done in over a year. His message was brief, and had the particular tone of a man who has suddenly discovered that the floor he thought was solid has a trapdoor in it. He said there seemed to be some kind of issue with the automatic payments, and could I call him back? I did not call him back. 3 days later, Claire drove to my house. She knocked. I opened the door because she is my daughter, and whatever else is true, that is also true. She stood on my porch and looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her face since she was 19 and had bounced her first check. Part confusion, part something younger and less formed, something that looked almost like it remembered how to be accountable. She said, "Mom, what is happening?" I said, "Come in. I'll make coffee." She came in. I made coffee. I set the manila folder on the table between us and opened it. I did not yell. I did not list grievances the way a woman gathering ammunition does. I simply showed her. Transfer by transfer. $43,000. 89 separate acts of help, of love, of showing up the way my mother had shown up, through sacrifice and action. And then I showed her the text she had sent me, the one about breathing room. Claire did not say anything for a very long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. She said, "Mom, I didn't know it was that much." I said, "I know you didn't. That is part of what I need you to understand." There was more conversation after that. Some of it was hard. Some of it was the kind of honest that leaves marks. Claire cried. I did not, though there was a moment when it was close. What I felt, more than sadness, was the grief of realizing that the closeness I thought I had purchased with $43,000 had never quite been real, and the cautious, tentative hope that maybe a real kind of closeness, built on honesty instead of money, was still possible. Derek did not come that day. He came a week later, with a different kind of face on than the one he usually wore, less cologne, as it were. He sat at my kitchen table, and he looked at his hands, and he said that he had not understood what they were taking, and that he had some things to be accountable for. It was not a perfect apology, but it was a real one, and real is enough. What I know now, that I did not know when all of this began, is that love and subsidy are not the same currency. My mother taught me that love is proved through action, through showing up, through sacrifice. But she never taught me, because she never needed to, that the other person has to be capable of receiving it as love. If they receive it as their due, as an entitlement, as simply the way things are, then your sacrifice becomes their baseline. And when you stop, you are not removing love. You are only removing a service they had come to expect. I removed the service. Whether the love was ever truly there on their end is something I am still learning the answer to. Claire and I are rebuilding. It is slower than I want, and more honest than it is comfortable, which probably means it is going the right way. She has picked up responsibilities she should have held for years. She calls me now, not because she needs a transfer, but sometimes just because she wants to talk, and I am learning, slowly, the difference in how those calls feel. I spent some of what I stopped giving them. I took myself to Charleston for a long weekend in the spring. I sat on a porch overlooking the harbor and ate a good meal, and watched the water and thought about my husband, who would have ordered the same thing I did, and made me laugh about something I cannot remember now, but can still feel the shape of. I bought myself a new needlepoint kit when I got home. A cardinal, bright red against a winter branch. I sit in my good chair by the window in the evenings, and I work on it, stitch by stitch. And I think about what my hands are for. Not for writing checks, not for making transfers in the early morning before anyone else is awake. For this, for small, careful, beautiful things that I make for no one but myself, that belong to no account, that cannot be withdrawn. The cardinal on the feeder is still there most mornings. I still watch him while I drink my coffee. Some things, it turns out, cost nothing and mean everything. And some things cost everything and, in the end, mean very little at all. If you are a woman sitting somewhere right now, in your kitchen or your car or your quiet house, doing the math on what you have given versus what has come back to you, I want you to hear this. Knowing the number is not a betrayal. It is a beginning. Count it. Write it down. Sit with it until you understand what it is telling you. It told me that I was worth more than I had been asking for. I think you probably are too.